Welcome to the deep dive. So, you know that feeling, right?
Oh, absolutely.
January 1st arrives and, well, whether you're someone who meticulously tracks it or you barely notice, it just lands with this enormous, almost ritualistic authority.
It's a universal starting line, isn't it?
Exactly, this universal starting line where we're all sort of collectively expected to just pause, execute this hard reset on our lives, revise our whole identity, and then dive headfirst into some kind of ambitious reinvention.
Mm.
But the sources we've compiled for this deep dive, they suggest there's a uh, a fundamental tension buried in that whole expectation.
A pretty significant one.
Yeah, we're basically comparing the rush of our human conventional calendars, the cultural demand for immediate novelty, against this concept of divine timing, which, according to the sources, is what actually governs our ultimate purpose.
Right. It brings to mind Ecclesiastes, to everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven.
That's the one.
And that contrast is
Yeah.
it's critical. The material frames this tension not as a choice between two different timelines, but as a matter of God's continuity versus, well, arbitrary human interruption.
Okay, so continuity versus interruption.
Exactly. So our mission today is to explore what true alignment really requires according to this specific biblical framework. And we're going to do that by looking at the deep spiritual architecture of the current Hebrew month, Tevet 5786.
I think the core insight here is incredibly stabilizing, and frankly, it's a huge relief.
It can be.
Because we are so often trained culturally and even spiritually to equate alignment with constant disruptive change. If we aren't changing visibly, we feel like we're failing. But the sources, they present alignment as obedience within continuity, which is a very different idea.
A completely different posture.
Right. If God has begun something, his plans stand forever. And there's that promise in Philippians that if he began a good work in you, he will carry it on to completion.
Yes. The premise we're working with here is that God doesn't just abandon his work simply because a human calendar flips over to January. The real task is learning to perceive his timing.
So it's about perception.
Exactly. And if we zoom out on the macro themes in this material, we first have to understand the governing rhythm.
Okay.
The Bible doesn't present time as something God just reacts to or something he manages passively. Daniel says explicitly that God rules over time. He changes times and seasons.
He's in control of it.
He's the author of it. This framework begins with God's own appointed times, what Scripture calls the moedim.
The appointed feasts.
Right, but that English translation, appointed feasts, often makes them sound merely symbolic or, historical.
Just nice story.
Kind of. But Leviticus clarifies they are holy convocations, and their root meaning establishes them as fixed, governing rhythms. They are divine appointments set into the very fabric of creation that dictate when certain things are supposed to happen and how.
So they're not just suggestions.
Not at all. They establish God's order and intention for time, giving it purpose and structure way beyond our quarterly reports.
That makes the transition to the current season, Tevet 5786, all the more critical, because the spiritual character of Tevet, it just sharply contrasts with that cultural optimism we all feel in January.
It's almost the exact opposite.
It really is. I mean, it's a winter month in the natural world. It's often the darkest season of the year, characterized by contraction and stillness. When you look outside right now, especially in the northern climates, natural light is reduced, visible progress is hidden, you don't see seeds sprouting, you often just see the ground frozen over or, blanketed in snow.
And the temptation is to panic.
To assume all progress has just stopped.
Right. And what's fascinating here is how these sources instruct us to interpret that darkness. Biblically, darkness isn't an absence of God's activity. It's interpreted as concealment for preparation.
Concealment for preparation, I like that.
It's essential foundational work happening away from the natural eye. Think about winterizing a building. All the most crucial work, shoring up the foundation, insulating the pipes, strengthening the framework, it all happens internally, often totally unseen.
Okay.
This is the condition where God works most deeply. Isaiah speaks to this promise. God gives treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places. This is where the unseen character development, the deep rooting, the foundation setting, that's where it all takes place.
So it's preparation for what's coming.
It's preparation for the visible weight of the spring increase.
So since we've established that Tevet reduces natural light, it immediately forces us to ask, what kind of sight is actually required this season? And that's where the Hebrew calendar framework is profoundly instructional. Tevet is traditionally associated with the Hebrew letter ayin, which literally means eye.
And this placement of the eye in the darkest season, it presents this powerful paradox, but one that's perfectly consistent with the concept of faith. Well, God trains our spiritual sight precisely when the limits of our natural sight are most obvious. Alignment requires us to see beyond our visible circumstances. It emphasizes that core scriptural principle. We walk by faith, not by sight.
But how does that manifest, practically? If the visible circumstances are overwhelming, if the ground is frozen and the news is bad, what exactly are we supposed to be looking at?
That's where the discernment comes in. We see this played out so beautifully in 2 Kings when Elisha's servant is just panicking.
Right, because they're surrounded by an enemy army.
Exactly. He is relying entirely on his natural sight. And Elisha prays, and the servant's eyes are opened. Suddenly, he sees what was already present. The mountains filled with chariots of fire.
What was invisible to him a moment before?
It was there the whole time. So Tevet requires that type of internal discernment, seeing according to God's already established word and promises, rather than according to immediate visible reality or, the cultural signals of chaos. Spiritual vision recognizes the invisible infrastructure that is already in place.
I understand the concept of developing that internal sight, the ayin, but how do the sources reconcile that vision with the common biblical command to declare, to prophesy, to announce God's plans? I mean, if we see it, shouldn't we immediately announce it?
That's a great question.
Because culturally, January is absolutely the season of the pay the mouth. Everyone is so quick to make these grand announcements, declarations, proclamations of massive New Year changes. How does the restraint of Tevet fit into that?
The material suggests that Tevet actually disciplines the mouth, so that sight must firmly precede speech.
Sight before speech.
It has to. This is the discipline of restraint. If your words consistently outrun the foundations that are being poured in the darkness, they undermine the entire structure.
That's a powerful image.
Think about it in architecture. You don't announce the completion date of a 50-story building until the foundations are fully poured, cured, and tested. The unseen work has to be secured first. We're explicitly warned in the Psalms, "Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth. Keep watch over the door of my lips."
That brings up a critical tension for the listener, though. In a culture that values speed and external validation, wouldn't this posture of quiet waiting and, restraint, wouldn't it be interpreted by the world as spiritual laziness or maybe lack of confidence?
That's the exact tension Tevet is here to address. There's a proverb that says, "Even a fool is counted wise when he holds his peace." The wisdom of this season is patience. Alignment requires that your vision outpaces your proclamation, ensuring the words you eventually speak have the stability of what God has already been building in secret. If we try to declare the tower complete while the foundation is still mud, we compromise the entire structure. We have to hold our peace and allow those unseen foundations to be secured.
Let's shift focus now to historical pressure, because Tevet has a very stark history of constraint and exposure.
It does.
Historically, it's marked by the beginning of the Siege of Jerusalem. This isn't just a historical note, is it? The sources present this pressure not merely as destruction, but as a severe exposure of internal reality.
Yes, and if we connect that historical event to the spiritual rhythm of the month, the relevance of that exposure becomes key. What is a siege? It's when the external supply lines are cut off.
Right. Nothing's coming in.
Nothing. So when external pressures close in, when resources dry up, when circumstances restrict, your movement's survival depends entirely on stewarding what is already within the walls of your life.
So it forces an internal inventory.
Completely. Tevet trains us to look inward and manage well, rather than scrambling desperately to acquire what lies outside. This is the principle of stewardship under constraint.
So we're talking about faithfulness in the little things.
Precisely. Jesus taught that whoever is faithful in little will also be faithful in much. The question this month poses is, what resources, what gifts, talents, tasks has God already placed inside your personal city walls?
Okay.
Alignment means being faithful with that small, limited quantity right now, without the expectation of an immediate external supply line opening up.
This stance, it directly confronts the core anxiety of January culture. The world is urging people to urgently go out and get more, to immediately acquire, expand, and chase the next big opportunity. But Tevet instructs us to first manage well, to be patient.
We have to remember that Scripture warns against haste-driven expansion. Proverbs says, "He who hastens with his feet sins." We confuse rapid movement with divine momentum all the time.
All the time.
And true faith, as it's grounded in Isaiah, is patient. It says, "Whoever believes will not act hastily." God measures success not by the novelty of a new project you started, but by the fruit that remains after all that initial excitement wears off.
That's good.
The quiet endurance developed during a time of constraint is infinitely more valuable than a hasty, ill-conceived expansion launched out of cultural pressure.
So this is all about building that internal strength.
It is. And as we look at the structural significance of the year 5786 itself, we find even more evidence of this foundational focus. Biblically, the number 6 corresponds to the Hebrew letter Vav.
And Vav means a connector.
A connector, a hook, or a nail.
Wow, that's a fascinating layer. So if the entire year, 5786, is defined by the Vav, this joining element, then alignment this year is not about horizontal movement into something completely new.
Which is the January mindset.
Exactly. Instead, it's described as vertical attachment to what God has already ordained.
You got it.
It sounds like the key is stability, not speed. It's about fastening heaven and earth together, kind of echoing what Jesus said, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven.
That structural metaphor of the nail and the connector is just crucial, especially coming out of the foundational work of Tevet. A nail secures alignment under tension.
Right.
If your foundation is weak, that nail will simply pull out when the pressure hits.
And the whole thing falls apart.
The whole thing falls apart. This language of fastening, it confirms the entire process. Believers are described as being built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone.
The cornerstone.
A cornerstone secures alignment. A nail holds the structure under duress. Tevet, this season of darkness and constraint, it prepares people to be fastened securely to that cornerstone before the acceleration and the weight of increase arrives later in the year.
So the preparation ensures the structure can handle the speed when it finally comes.
It has to.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, right now? It means that January is better viewed through the lens of divine timing as a checkpoint, not a forced, frantic starting line. True alignment, which is rooted in obedience and quiet endurance in your current assignment, it provides peace, not the pressure the culture puts on us to constantly reinvent ourselves.
And this is where the stability rests. The positioning that might feel completely out of step with cultural expectation, the slowness, the restraint, the internal focus, that's actually affirmed as obedience.
That feels counterintuitive, but also very freeing.
It is. God's ways are not our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. What God began before January remains under his authority after January. This deep dive really confirms that alignment isn't a feeling of hype or forced momentum. It is fundamentally a posture of obedient waiting and foundational preparation.
So our trust is on God's unchanging nature.
Yes. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. That's the anchor.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to consider. Those who truly honor this timing, who use this season of darkness for internal work, for quiet stewardship, and for foundational preparation, they discover that when the visible seasons of growth do arrive, their capacity to sustain that increase is exponential.
The foundation can hold the weight.
The foundation can hold the weight. So maybe the question to ask yourself is this. What essential preparation or foundational work might be concealed in your darkest season right now, which is designed specifically to sustain the unprecedented weight of your future increase?